Let's talk about China now, though, shall we? Because the country poses a genuine and increasing cyber risk to the UK, according to the chief of the UK's Intelligence and Security Agency, Anne Keast-Butler. Director of GCHQ says Beijing is working with others to try and reshape the world. She also believes China's irresponsible actions are weakening the security of the internet. Benedict Rogers is founder of Hong Kong Watch, and Benedict's with us live now. Hello, Benedict.
Hello, good evening.
Thanks for joining us tonight. Do you know, when I read this before, when she came out and she made this statement, I thought, we've heard this, haven't we? Quite a lot, so much recently. We've heard it from groups of MPs, we've heard it from charities, and now we're hearing it from GCHQ. So what is new, and what does she want us or others to do with this information, do you think?
Well, you're absolutely right. I mean, we've had just in the last few months alleged cyber attacks or attempted cyber attacks on parliamentarians, on the Electoral Commission, on the Ministry of Defence. And actually, the intelligence services have been warning of the challenge of China for some time. The head of MI5 and MI6 have made comments in the past couple of years. So there's nothing necessarily that new about her remarks. It's an important reminder. But I think it is important because we need to wake up to this challenge and really step up both our defenses of our cybersecurity and our willingness to stand up to Beijing on all fronts.
Benedict, what does that look like, though, stepping up our defenses to cybersecurity? What are the practicalities of that?
Well, I think it means being ever more vigilant to hacking attempts. It means calling them out much more quickly. I mean, when the reported attack on the Ministry of Defence took place just very recently, government ministers were very reluctant to acknowledge that it was China, even though it was pretty obvious from the reports. And it also means, I think, punitive action against China when it does these things, because I see today the Chinese ambassador has been summoned to the Foreign Office. That's a welcome step, but Beijing's not going to change its behavior just with slap on the wrists from the Foreign Office. It really needs meaningful sanctions, and there were some sanctions imposed in response to the cyber attacks on Parliament, but they were fairly token sort of sanctions against mid-level.
Yeah. But how far do those sanctions need to go? Because, if you go to a certain point with sanctions, then you start limiting trade. And of course, the UK imports so many goods from China, specifically electronics and plastics, that could not be produced as cheaply in the EU and other parts of the world. So we bring them in here. There'd be concerns from so many people about the effect on British business if we stopped importing those goods.
That's absolutely true. But what we need to do alongside more meaningful sanctions is at the same time reduce our dependency on China, diversify our supply chains, start producing and importing things from other parts of the developing world. There are plenty of other markets that could do that from. And no one's suggesting we stop trade with China, but I think we can reduce our dependency so that we can stand up more effectively to Beijing.
Benedict, thank you for that. Always good to speak to you on this. Benedict Rogers, the founder of Hong Kong Watch. Let's speak with Chris Phillips now, who's a former head of the National Counter-Terrorism Security Office. Chris, you were just listening to Benedict there, and he talked about reducing our dependency from China. But that's hard, isn't it? That's a difficult task.
It is hard, but we've got ourselves in a very difficult position, being over-reliant on a country that really has been basically stealing our stuff, our knowledge for the last 30 years. We've allowed the Chinese to infiltrate effectively all of our universities right across the West. And of course, in our universities is our knowledge, and they've managed to steal our knowledge, take it back to China, and then make things much cheaper and better than we can. And we've allowed this to happen, and I think it is time that we woke up and stop being so dependent on the Chinese, and actually learn to do things for ourselves again.
So what would it look like? What would restrictions look like? Bearing in mind that, Anne Keast-Butler, director of GCHQ, says it's an increasing cyber risk to the UK and a genuine threat. So what would those restrictions? How far should they go?
Well, first and foremost, you have to remember as well that we're moving into the era of AI, and that's going to be a game changer in any case. And of course, what we do is what we've done is made ourselves over reliant on computer systems and the internet. And of course, China have battalions, literally battalions, blocks full of people that are actually in there hacking and trying to do cyber attacks or making cyber attacks or infiltrating different aspects of our society. And we have got to be really careful here. And I think what we've relied on in the past is our ability, a bit like nuclear weapons, if you like. They're able to attack us with nuclear weapons, and we can attack them, so they don't do it. And we have to be able to do the same to them as they do to us in order to prevent them wanting to attack us.
Chris, just before we let you go, Keith Butler also warned about underestimating Iran's cyber capabilities, which were, in her words, continuing to grow. This is her first major speech since she was appointed, first female head of GCHQ last year. What did you make of it, and specifically that warning about Iran too?
Well, I think it's good that the heads of MI5, MI6, and GCHQ are coming out, and we should listen to them because that they are important people in our society, and they do know what's going on below the surface, and it's important that these messages are not only received but action is taken from them, and the likes of universities do start breaking links with the Chinese state effectively. And we take action on what she's saying.
Chris, thank you very much for your time tonight. Chris Phillips, the former head of the Counter-Terrorism Security Office.
Let's welcome to the programme first Chung Ching Kwong, who's security lead at the Inter-Parliamentary Alliance on China. Welcome to you.
Hello.
Hi. Can I just ask you a general question first? In your view, is the potential threat from China being taken seriously enough?
I don't think the government has, or the country in itself has been taking China as a threat seriously enough. Like take a recent revealed cyber reconnaissance that happened to our legislators here in the UK. The government did not notice them until 3 years later when they found out of US DOJ unsealed indictment. And then they started to move to giving them briefings and so on, which is unacceptable and reflects the lack of awareness when it comes to. At the same time, there hasn't been a coherent response to the threat, and is still not on the enhanced tier of the foreign registration scheme.
Okay, so you want action on those fronts. Now, the Chinese ambassador being called in, we're told. What do you believe the Foreign Office, the relevant minister, should be saying to that ambassador now, today?
I think it's time for the UK official to tell the Chinese ambassadors it's high time for the UK government to review the status of these Hong Kong trade and economic offices. And if it actually carries out transnational repression, it exceeds what they're established for. And it's a clear violation of the Vienna Convention. Transnational repression cannot go unchecked in this country, and responsible personnel should be made accountable and personnel non grata in this case.
Yeah, and which means, I suppose, expulsion for people operating on behalf of China in this country.
Yes, I do agree. I don't think anyone who is hindering British nationals or people who are residing in the country's freedom of speech, physical safety and personal safety should be allowed to remain in the country, because it is not what the UK stands for.
Yeah, at the moment, the People's Republic of China is designated a systemic challenge, isn't it? And there are those who argue, and I think your group will be among them, who believe that China should be redesignated as a threat. Were that to happen, what difference would it make?
I think it would completely change what's left behind from the golden era, that view that the China market is one that we would happily engage in without any reservations. But the truth is there should be some bottom lines that we've had to hold firm. For example, accountability, like human rights violations, breaking the Sino-British Joint Declaration, committing someone would define as a genocide in the Uyghur area should all be held accountable and taken into considerations when we enter into any kind of trade agreements or any trade arrangement with China. And also forced labor products shouldn't be entering the UK market. UK consumers shouldn't be accomplices when it comes to forced labor in these settings. And I think changing China into a threat or naming it threat would help the country to develop a better and more comprehensive approach towards the country.
Right, now we have seen action taken, haven't we? We've seen the Chinese company Huawei excluded from vital communications infrastructure. We've seen China pushed out of the Sizewell C nuclear project. We have heard the Foreign Secretary, David Cameron, talking about the need for Europe to have a harder edge to its policy on things, including China policy. Is that not enough? In concrete terms, give me an example of what you would like to see done.
I think it's not enough. Like, if you read the Intelligence Security Committee report that's issued last year in the Parliament, it says the China infiltration happens on all levels in the UK as a country. So the response to this threat should be on all levels as well. It's not just excluding Huawei from a sensitive 5G rollout, but also in cases like, for example, other than the NHS and like PPEs that we're talking about, what about like forced labor made wigs? What about dumping into the UK and Europe market? Like, these things all represent the expanding influence of China. So if you look at what's happening in Canada, they're looking into foreign interference in elections. Like in upcoming in the UK, has the government taken any action to prevent any kind of foreign interference? I don't think that like a lot of effort being done over there.
Yeah, although we have seen that threat mentioned, haven't we, in government by those within government. Just lastly, really, really briefly, do you accept at all that, look, China, we're looking at the second biggest economy in the world. Is it possible or wise to limit or exclude China from the British economy, and for that matter, from academia and national life generally?
I don't think it's possible, and I'm not asking for a complete decoupling of China. I'm simply asking accountability and a bottom line. Like, the bottom line should stop at, I think, forced labor, which everybody will agree, stop at human rights violations, which is a universal value. I don't think it's possible, given this day and age, to completely cut ties with China. But I think we have to make sure that we uphold our principles, and there are certain things that we cannot, like, just live with.
All right, Chung Cheng Kwong from the Inter-Parliamentary Alliance on China. Really good to get your thoughts. Thank you for joining us.